the planets are the actor, right? So are we looking at like Amy Adams? Is this Humphrey Bogart? Like who's playing, right? And how close are they together? And then we're going to look at the sign, which is like, I call it the genre. I think costume's a good idea too. Costume works well with this, but I often say like this, the sign is the genre, or like the lighting, the mood, right? The mood and the tone. And then the house is the set. Where's this set at? Is it New York City? Is it in your bedroom? Like, where's the setting? So today we're going to be talking a lot about the set.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, J.N. Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for. Hello and welcome to Feminine Alchemy. Thank you so much for being here. I am your host, J.N. Behringer, and we've got Kaylee Rose and Julie Dean Richards on as usual. Say hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hey, everyone.
So this is part 3 of our 4, maybe plus part series. We'll see what happens on astrology. And we're going to talk about houses today, which is really important for astrology. And it's the most action based in my mind. So before we get into that, we're going to do some fun news and updates about what anyone wants to share about their lives, because guess what? You guys don't get to hear a lot about what's going on and what's going on behind the scenes. So it's very exciting. So Julie, tell us about what's going on in your life.
Oh, I was going to go last.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Kaylee, you go first.
Oh, geez. No, when we brought up this like life update thing, I was like, oh, I don't even know. Like, my life is just going. Like, yeah. I mean, life update. I'm not super sick anymore, so that's good. Pregnancy is going well. I started feeling the baby move yesterday, which was so exciting. And I don't know, I guess we're kind of in a lot of transition right now that I think about it. My husband is looking at different options for new jobs, hopefully a work from home job, so that he can be more, I don't know, we just long for him to be home more. We love spending time together as a family. That's part of why we homeschool. That's part of why we live the lifestyle that we do. So we're kind of in a transition there as he's looking for different opportunities. And honestly, like, I want to move. I want to move, but it's not going to happen yet.
All right. My update is that I am obsessed with digging holes in my yard. Much to my husband's chagrin. And for the first time ever, I told him ahead of time before I dug holes in the yard. So he's a little bit happier about that this year. But last year I had, I don't know, 5, 7, maybe 8 different kinds of tomatoes and a couple of peppers and, all the herbs and stuff, and some cucumbers, just the usual green beans. I can name more. It's fine. I don't have to. But, I love growing weird versions of stuff. So like I, of course, grew a San Marzano tomato, but also I grew like white tomatoes. And so that was really fun. And then these like fun tomatoes that were like black on the outside, like they get sunburned and tan for some so to speak. And then they like, when they red up, it's like red through the middle. And so these got these cool black streaks. It's so fun. So yeah, that's my thing right now is I'm digging up the yard and putting in plants. And I ordered trees and I'm really excited about that. I ordered trees. They're supposed to come in the end of April and they're going to create a lovely barrier between me and my neighbor's house. So that way we are, just keeping good neighborliness, right? When you have good, also that, yeah, for my creates a visual barrier for my child more than anything, not to like run on the street. So that is what's up in my life in my house.
I love that you're such a gardener. Like that makes me so happy. I wish that I want to, one day I will be much more like that because I love herbs and I love doing herbalist things, but I have not had success with plants in any way, shape, or form since I stopped helping my parents garden when
Mm.
I was like 16 or something. Um, but for us, I think some people know, if people have watched my stories, they probably know what's going on with us. But, and I think I've talked about before on the podcast that we're selling our house. But I guess our big news about houses is, well, we're in the middle of chaos right now because we are selling everything because we're becoming nomadic. We are going to live in a tent for a year. Yay for us. We get to live in a tent. Um, we are going to be traveling the US, and a lot of people like are like, why aren't you doing an RV, or like why aren't you, doing a camper or something connected to your car? uh, we decided that we wanted to do tent life first because we want to be able to kind of check it out, like figure out what we like. It's such a low investment. An RV is a really high investment. A camper, you can get a cheap camper. It's true, but it's a much bigger load. Like it's a different kind of thing, and it's harder to drive your car. And there's just like, if you want to get a good one or a big one, it's a big investment. So we decided this is the smallest investment to see if we like this kind of traveling lifestyle. This has been like coming for months and months, and dawned on us, but we are like literally just like selling everything we have, going crazy. We got an offer on our house yesterday. It was too low, so we still have stuff up and coming, but we will start next week. We leave for North Carolina, and we're going to make an entire circle around the whole US and this year. So we're going to circle the US like 1.25 times. Well, kind of like 1.5 times, because we'll end in Texas at the end of the year. And then I guess we'll go back to Florida for Christmas. But yeah, so follow us, check out what we're doing. I'll be posting more stuff about it. Right now, I'm just feeling like so chaotic. I don't even know what to do. But yeah, that's what we're doing. We're so excited.
I'm so excited for you. I had some really beautiful friends who were like, I think we want to live here. I think we want to live here. So we'll just keep traveling until and sort of like try out new places. And it worked out really well. And they documented it too. So I'm excited to see your adventures and see what you experience. This is going to be so interesting and so fun.
Yeah, well, you reminded me. I totally forgot. Like, such a big part of this is that I'm a locational astrologer, right? Like, that's part of what I do is I check out locations. And so, part of the reason we decided to do this was because we want to go live on all of our lines and experience it and see what it's like and get variety and see what it's like for the kids to better research and document locational astrology, show people how it works and what it's like to experience these things. So, it's going to be so wild and so fun. So people can follow along with me on my Instagram. But yeah, we're so stoked to like just yeah, find out where is the best place for us.
Example of like what living on your lines means. Just just a snippet.
Yeah, I totally can. Also, did I stop the record? Did I mess it up? Because I pressed pause instead of mute for a second.
Nope. It's still running.
Okay, great. Sorry,
Eight
because it
minutes
did
in.
pause for just this. It like paused, so I hope it didn't cut you out. But an example of living on your lines. So when we do locational astrology, we're basically taking your birth chart, your natal chart, and we're putting it on the globe. So we're putting it on the earth, and we are when we do that, it's as if the planets make a line. And so there are different kinds of lines. There are ones that run from north to south, and there's ones that run from east to west. And when you live near one of those lines, you get basically the energy of that line. So it will be the same energy that is present in that planet. So if you live by Venus, depending on how Venus shows up in your birth chart, because lots of people, the fallacy with locational astrology, and I'm sure we can do a whole episode on this someday, but the fallacy with it is this idea, oh, just go to your Venus line and it'll be so great and you'll love it. Or just go to your Jupiter line, go to the happy planets, the good planets lines, and it'll be awesome. But the trick is that it actually matters how that planet shows up in your chart. So if you have Venus that's directly opposed someone like Pluto or Mars, you're not going to have the best time on your Venus line because your Venus is not in an optimal position and she's struggling. She's at war basically with some powerful planets, and that's how you might feel when you're in that place, because this is your birth chart on the earth. So it's this idea that different places bring out different parts of your personality and different parts of you, which I think we can all agree that, yeah, like when I go to a different place, different parts of me are activated, different things come out. And so you want to, when you live near one of these lines, you're going to get kind of the energy of that line. So typically, if we use something like Venus, because some people are familiar with her, then you're going to get something like, oh, a lot of conversations about women, a lot of stuff around money, a lot of stuff around value. Like a lot of the stuff you're feeling in Venus retrograde, a lot of these themes will be present on that line or amplified on that line, not necessarily in a retrograde way that's like tougher per se, depending on your chart, but that's going to be the themes. It's going to be a lot about value, money, relationships, femininity on that line. Whereas like a sun line might be more about like leadership, standing out, shining, your personality coming out. And so when I help people go and locate on a line, I'm looking for what's best in their chart and what's feasible for them and what that might bring, what different places might bring for them. Sorry, that was like a long-winded
That was
answer.
great. That was
Okay.
great. My Venus is directly across from my Mars, and my Venus and Mars lines are about 100 miles west of where I live. So I don't know if that's good or bad. That's why you were like, I was like, I am waiting with bated breath. What is happening?
Well, you could be getting, yeah, it can be a playful energy sometimes because when Venus and Mars play with each other, it's that back and forth, that
Yeah,
tug and pull between masculine and feminine, but it can also become agitating. It's like, why are you doing this to me? Like, this is, the masculine's like, why are you being dumb, feminine? And the feminine's like, why are you being dumb, masculine? So there can be a real like feeling of like dancing around, push and shove. You don't know what you're kind of getting.
I
So
love
be
this. I love
physical.
this.
Physical activity is good.
Physical activity is good. Yeah. Okay. Well, when I started going to the gym every day, my life turned around. How about that? How about that for physical activity? We are talking about the houses today. We will definitely do a locational astrology thing sometime very soon because that was fascinating. I'm still fascinated by locational astrology. So thank you for indulging me. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out in your family's life with the whole dynamic, right? That's a lot of people to be sort of trying to cater to, and like what does that look like? So that'll be really interesting. Everybody keep an eye on Julie's Instagram before that. So we're gonna do the first 6 houses today because last week we did all the signs in one episode, which was absolutely lovely. Also, it was like 2 hours. So it's just a lot of information. There's a lot of information in astrology because it's a blend of math and art at the same time, math and humanities at the same time. There's so much to say. There's so much to say. So let's do an overview of what is the difference between signs and houses in anyone's opinion. How do you relate to the difference between the two?
All right, I guess I'll go first. So, when I think about houses, I think about different areas of life. It's like where stuff plays out. When I think of signs, that's more like the energy, the flavor of things almost. And to make that make a little bit more sense, I'll touch on planets for a moment. I think of planets as a little bit more of like the actors. They have a little bit more like tangible, like stuff is happening kind of energy. and then they express through the energy of the signs, though sign energy can express by itself as well. And it's a little bit more subtle maybe than planetary energy. But it's like, I don't know, it's the flavor. It's the flavor of the energy. And then the houses are like, this is where it's happening. It's playing out in this area of life, or this yeah, just essentially this area of life.
I like what you said. So it's like in your and what you're saying is like the planet is the actor, the sign is the costume, and the house is the setting in a
Yeah.
way. Does that feel true?
Yeah, yeah, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, this is always the analogy I give when I explain, when I do like a rundown, which is exactly right. Like, yes, the planets are the actor, right? So are we looking at like Amy Adams? Is this Humphrey Bogart? Like, who's playing, right? And how close are they together? And then we're going to look at the sign, which is like, I call it the genre. I think costume's a good idea too. Costume works well with this, but I often say like this, the sign is the genre, or like the lighting, the mood, right? The mood and the tone. And then the house is the set. Where's this set at? Is it New York City? Is it in your bedroom? Like, where's the setting? So today we're going to be talking a lot about the set.
So I always, and I love this. That's why I was like asking Steve questions about. Like, I just love the way you guys put it. I've always thought of houses as the way you do that thing, sort of like the if you take the sign and turned it into a more tangible piece, into a an action, into a um manifestation, almost into like crystallized into real world, right? Which, yeah, that's the setting, that's the area of life. So I've never thought of it that way. I love it. I love it. This analogy, beautiful. Okay, so let's start with the first house. The first house is the Aries flavored house, right? And but what is the difference between Aries and the first house, and how does that sort of flavor play out in the house for you guys? What do you see? What do you look for when you're looking at someone's first house, and what are you going to tell them in the first house?
So when I'm looking at the first house, especially if I'm looking at somebody's chart, somebody's birth chart, it's like it's the most personal house. So whatever energy is in there, it can feel sometimes larger than life for that person, or it can feel like it's so much a part of them that they don't recognize it because it's just so much a part of them. That house is very connected to the physical body and how you actually look, especially where the rising sign, like that's the cusp, that's the doorway into the first house. And I don't know, I think of the first house also in a lot of ways as like that's where your it's kind of like where your strength of will lies, where your energy to exist lies. It's the house that you're born into. um like and I'm not even talking like physically, like this is the house that, like, physical house that your parents lived in when you were born. It's more, this is the flavor and the area where you came into this life. um and so go if we're looking at beginnings, if we're looking at beginning of life, if we're looking at physical body, if we're looking at things that just feel huge to the person, I very often will go to that first house to see, like, okay, what's going on? So there are similarities between that first house and Aries in that, like, and Mars for that matter, in that they're very body oriented. But the sign is more, in my mind, it's more an energy, and the house is more like actually your body, actually your perspective and how you show up in your life.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that a lot. I think that it's very easy to conflate signs, houses, and planets that are associated with those. But I would say they're quite distinct. And I think that the first house is a little easier to see how it's distinct a little bit, but just because It's physically you. It's you. It's who you are. And I think a lot of people get worried about their first house, depending on how they jive with their rising sign. If they don't feel like they jive with their rising sign, they're like, what do you mean my first house is me? That's not me. I'm my moon, or I'm my sun. And you are all those things. But the first house to me in whole sign astrology, the first house is about your natal promise. So it's this idea that there's something that you promise to do here on earth in this incarnation. There's something for you to do, and that message lies in the first house. Now, of course, that message is connected with the other houses, and there's ways to connect them, as we've kind of talked about this before. But in Hellenistic astrology, that first house is like, what did you promise to do here? What are you here for? What was your contract that you made when you came? And so when I look at the first house, I see this as like many times like, oh, this is the true self, and maybe it's the self that you can't see, but it's also, encompassed in your physical body, which I think is cool when we're talking about the feminine, because the feminine is such it's part of your physical body, right? The physical body is the feminine. So and I want to also point out lastly is like, and you'll see to remember, and I'm sure Kaylee was going to say something about this too, but if we look at the houses as growing, as maturing, we talked about this a little bit, right? This is you. This first house is all about you being born. So like think about the baby. I mean, a baby doesn't even really know they're them. They don't really understand that they're separate from their mother when they're born. But if you think about the first house as like, this is you being born, this is like baby you, it's just you. And then the second house, we add on to that as like to the stuff. So that's what I'd say about the first house.
So good. So good. I was born for nothing then because I got nothing in my first house.
No, you have a sign in your first house. Not
I know.
nothing.
Well, talk about this for a second, because what does it mean when you have nothing in your first house in any house? How do you tend to interpret that for people?
So when somebody has a quote unquote empty house, what they're saying, for anyone who doesn't know, is that they don't have planets there. But you never truly have an empty house. There is always sign energy flowing into that house. And when there is a planet in a house, it's like that whatever sign energy is there kind of gets, I don't know, like kind of narrowed down a little bit. It gets funneled, it gets channeled into that planetary energy to a certain extent. But when you just have a sign in a house, that house is still important. That sign is still important. They're still significant to you. It's just that the sign energy is not getting funneled down or intensified into a planetary energy. And so, in a sense, you're getting almost like a purer version, pure, not better, but pure as in like not shifted slightly by a planet. You get a purer version of that sign energy to play with, especially in that area of life. So, say you don't have any planets in your first house, but what's the sign? That energy permeates your body, that energy permeates who you are as an individual and how you show up to your life.
And Jan, this is so perfect for you because people who don't know about this is a whole other episode. We're going to do an episode with someone who does this, but Jan and I have two aura layers that are the same. You can have, anyway, there's this whole thing called aura layers, and someone can see your aura in the layers. And Jan and I have two of the same aura layers. And I was going to say, this goes right along with those two aura layers, which is the lavender and the crystal, which is the freedom, right? Freedom and like holding space for everything. Because what is Aquarius all about? Everyone who doesn't know by now, Jan is an Aquarius rising. So her natal promise revolves around this idea of bursting into freedom, being herself, making shifts, breaking structures down, innovation, innovating and making new spaces and bringing water, being the water bearer, serving the collective. Like, if that's not you, I don't know what is. So
That's a good point. And it's a pure version of looking like an alien. So
like you look like a witch more than an alien. And I mean
I
that in
know.
like a really great way, like a
I
sexy
do.
way.
Thank you. And one day when I am 90 something, I'm gonna have a nose and chin that touch. Let's talk about the second house. What is the second house? What does it mean? What does it do? What part of your life is it acting out? And what setting or scenery are we working with here?
So if we're going to build on the first house being you, think about the next stage for like a baby growing up, right? They have to first realize they're a person. So that's like the first house. And the second house is you realize there's stuff around you, right? Like what does a 2-year-old say? And this goes along with something called annual perfections, which we don't have time to get into this, but it's this idea that every year your life correlates with one of the houses. So in your second, from 2 to 3, you're in this second house, which is all about the stuff, right? And what do 2-year-olds love to say? Mine. It's mine. It's
And
mine,
no.
right? And no, like you can't touch that, right? Which is great. So the second house is literally all about assets, value, things. How do you value yourself? What do you value? But really it's very physical. I think we often, because we talk about psychological astrology a lot, we talk about how it's that value based and what you value and how you value yourself, but it's also very physical, tangible stuff like your house and your car and your bed and your money. Like it's all those physical things, and it's correlated with Taurus, right, which like loves stuff and comfort and things, and is good at second house is a little better at boundaries, right? Because it's ruled by an earth sign. So what do you think, Kaylee?
Well, I think of the second house as like just if I were to have just a little catchphrase for it, it's the house of values and valuables, which goes along with exactly what you were saying. Yes, it's what do you value? What concepts do you value? How do you value your time? What physical objects do you value? What are you filling your space with? What is your environment like? And what would you prefer it to be like? This house is also connected to just resources in general, but particularly your personal resources, personal finances. If you don't like the way that you handle money or you love the way you handle money, the second house can probably tell you a lot about why and maybe how you can align things differently so that you like how you handle money better.
I love this. I love this. Um, and I'm just going to like say the elephant in the room. Everybody talks about, oh, what happened? How do I find out my chart where my money is? This is where you go. This is where you go. You kind of look at Venus, you kind of look at Taurus, but really you're going to look at the second and the eighth house, because that is the second house is driving your money
Jan,
subconsciously.
Jan's
What?
favorite house. It's
It's
Jan's.
my favorite house. The
You-
second house is my favorite. And I have to say this because I have Jupiter in Pisces in the second house, so it's like very confusing. We're just gonna really expand on confusion. That's all we're gonna do. So, um, yeah. But I'll to say, like, these are the big questions that when people get an astrology reading, they're like, when am I getting married, and where's my money coming from? Love and money. Like, how do I do this? How do I do this? You're going to look at the second house and you're going to look at the seventh house. And then you're going to also flesh out some more in between, because it's about more than the second and the seventh house in life, right? You're not going to feel fulfilled if you make a bunch of empty money, and you're not going to feel fulfilled if you're married to somebody that you hate. Plain and simple.
Totally.
So, yes, but when people are asking these questions, that's where the astrologer is going, straight to the second house.
For sure.
So,
Not and just to give people an idea too, when we look at houses, we're looking at multiple things, right? We're looking at what sign is in that house, right? And that will play the flavor. So what sign do you have there? We're also looking at what planets you have there and how they interact. but we're also going to look at who is in charge of that sign. So like every sign is ruled by somebody. So let's just take Jan talked about Pisces. So, well, in my world, Jupiter is in charge of Pisces, but in your world, in most people's world, Neptune is in charge of Pisces. So you would ask the question, how are you going to make money? And you would look at, you want to also find Neptune, because Neptune's in charge of that house, because Pisces is there and Neptune is in charge of Pisces. It's the chain of command. You want to follow that chain of command, and that will help you. So don't worry if you don't have anything in the second house. It doesn't, like we said before, empty houses don't mean that part of your life is empty. And sometimes it's nicer to have an empty house, especially in a house like the second house, than it is to have a lot of planets there that you do not want there. Or I was going to say this before when we were talking about empty houses and empty signs, there are still planets across the way that are interacting with that house. So there's still energy coming from other planets. And we'll get into that when we talk about aspects and aspect patterns a little bit more. But just know, like, if you have an empty house, it doesn't mean, people get really uptight, especially with this house because it's money house. Like if you have an empty house, that doesn't mean anything bad about your money situation. And you can have any sign in the second house and you can still have a good money situation. So just putting that out there.
I love it. One thing I want to leave people with before we move to the third house is that we heard money, money, money. We heard stuff, stuff, stuff. We did not hear anything about career. And money and career are two very different things. And so I just want to start the unhooking now, because that is a societal belief and it is not actually a reality, and it's not how we work with energies. So that's my soapbox. Thanks for listening, guys.
I love your soapboxes so much.
Thank you. People tend to, but I get to the end of one and I feel like, um, I said a lot of things all of a sudden, and maybe I don't remember all of the words I said. I'm pretty sure I meant them all. And also, I feel like I said a lot of things. So here we are. Let's move to the third house. This house, funny enough, is the one that I struggle the most to understand. And I think it's because that's where my North Node is. Like, I get Gemini, but the third house, all I got is cousins. So tell me about the third house.
So the third house is really intriguing, because, like, yeah, it's a house that's about communication, but it's also a house that's, like, in a lot of ways, it's about your neighborhood. Like, what's within your, like, okay, the second house in some ways is kind of like what's in your immediate environment. And then if you go a little bit farther out, like into your neighborhood, um, like, okay, what's there? So you have things like neighbors. You also have things like siblings. Siblings are connected to that house. Because once you realize you're a baby, you realize you exist, and then you realize there's stuff around you, but then who are you going to start interacting with that you recognize as not you? Because you still kind of recognize yourself as being part of your mother and potentially your father. But if you have siblings, like, oh, whoa, who is this person who's interacting with me and then I'm bumping up against? Um, so that's how the sibling connection comes in there. Cousins can be connected in that same way, because it's like, it's not quite you. It's a little removed from you, but it's still connected to you. Um, oh, there's more to the third house. Julie might bring this up as well. One thing I love about the third house is that more anciently it was referred to as the house of the goddess, which I just super love for obvious reasons. But Julie, do you want to chime in on any of that?
No, yeah, that's exactly where I was going. I was definitely going, the third house is the house of the goddess. Why is it the house of the goddess? So let's just talk about that. This is going to be me pulling some threads for you, but that 3 is very important. Remember, in the very beginning, go back to our third episode where we started talking about the triple goddess, right? And that number 3 being very intertwined with the feminine in that way, because it has this beautiful mystical quality to it, and everything comes in threes, right? And that is true of the third house. The third house is very magnetic, and people don't often talk about this, but the third house is lovely because it's communication based. So it's about talking and communicating, putting down roots. And what does the goddess do? What does the feminine do? Well, she supports and creates a community. Everyone's talking to each other, everyone's coming together, and we of course can create community across boundaries, which is a lot more like the ninth house, but it's much more, the third house is much more close knit. It's our close knit communities. And that's part of the reason it's the house of the goddess, because it's this lovely close knitting of our hearts together with people around us and communicating with them and teaching them the way of the body and the soul, because the third house is associated with education that's more elementary. So we're going to think about neighborhood education, hands-on education, education that's close to home. And that reminds us again, this is a very feminine house as we're thinking about the body, right? And our physical education. What do we learn first? We learn that the things that are closest to us and in our homes and around us. So this is a really lovely house because it's so community based. And it does tell us a lot about, when I look at the third house, it tells me a lot about your communication style, how you talk to other people. What is your community like? What is your relationship with your siblings like? What is your relationship to spirituality and deity? I know we often look to the ninth, but the third has that quality as well. And it's the spirituality of the third house is a much closer to the chest kind of spirituality. It's a much closer to the self. It's a much more communal kind of spirituality in our connection. And then the third house also is a little bit innovative. It's technology based, right? Because who's associated with the third house? Gemini. Right. So it's always going to be talking, expanding, but also giving you a little bit of that technology piece. And because it's also a little bit of that in town travel communication line. And so that's all third house stuff. We could go really deep with this, but I'll leave the third house there.
I love it. I think you guys just described Mr. Rogers' neighborhood.
Seriously.
And a one-room
great.
schoolhouse, and where the teacher is the goddess. I love it. And fun fact, we did not make it the third episode because that was like on purpose. It just happened to be. I'll go back to our third episode. 3 is very important. I was like, oh my gosh. That's funny. That's beautiful. Okay, so do we want to talk about the IC at all, or do we just want to jump into the fourth house?
Sorry,
Kaylee
I
is
love the IC.
joyfully clapping. Let's talk
I
about the
mean,
IC.
my sun and my moon hang out right by the IC, which is part of why I love the IC. So yeah, let's talk about it. The
Yeah, so what does
IC,
IC stand for,
yeah,
and what does it
so it
do?
stands for Imam Coily, which means the bottom of the sky. And it's an angle. So there are so we have the ascendant, that's an angle, a main angle. We have the IC, we have the descendant, and the ascendant and descendant make up like the horizon line. And then we have the MC, or the midheaven, which it's connected to the IC. They make up that line together that cuts the chart in half, so that you have a left side and a right side. And the IC is very connected to ancestry, where you came from, generational patterns, what you were up to before you were born into this existence. It's the most introverted of the angles. It's the most inward, and maybe a little hard to find a tangible expression for sometimes. But it's part of why that fourth house can sometimes feel a little bit private, because it's the cusp of that fourth house. And so if you have planets, especially something like the sun and the moon near the IC, it can lend this flavor of it can lend to introversion, or maybe like not wanting to be in the spotlight as much. But it can also kind of lend this air of like, okay, whatever planet this is, it is expressing ancestral energy, and I'm here to process that.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we do this in locational astrology, these angles are really, really important. and they determine so much on the map and things like that. And one of the things that I find with the IC is that the IC feels very much like home. It's often like how you feel about the home, but also how you feel about the land, how you feel about nature and in that area, as well as it's always ancestral. Like Kaylee mentioned, it's very, very ancestral. It's very roots based. And I do find like people, wherever your Pluto IC is on your map, like people feel like they have to go there for some reason. Like people, it's just they have this karmic connection and they have to go there to do past cleaning out of past trauma, breaking threads. And so I think the IC also kind of holds this thread of exactly like what Kaylee was saying, you know, what are your spiritual contracts and your connections to the past, your connections to the earth? Like, what are your connections to the physical plane of the earth? And what are your connections, like, what um, to your ancestral line? And sometimes I feel like it can really play into, because when you look at a whole sign chart, the IC can be anywhere from the second house all the way to the fifth house. So it can be in all of those places. And so sometimes it lends to tell me a little bit more of which side of the ancestral loop, like your mother's side or your father's side, are you more aligned with? Like, how is that affecting you depending on where your IC tends to be? So, um, look at us. I was just thinking about like, this is like a whole, we're giving like, this is an entire course, but this is like an advanced astrology course right here. But we're throwing you in the deep end because if you learn it this way, then it's not hard for you as you go on. You don't have to like add and add and add, but like all of these things will come together. And hopefully these concepts are building on each other as like we're talking about the houses. And the reason that we talked about the IC and these angles is that these angles make up, if you think about the circle, think about X marks the spot, right? Across that circle, those angles are helping us to orient ourselves in the houses. They help us orient where we're at and where things are placed. So that's why we're talking about this IC thing. It's one of the angles, and it happens to be the first one that you run into as your, well, it's not really because the ascendant, but it's, you know, one of the most important ones in the bottom half of your chart.
Yeah. Any of these angles also represent a change in seasons, right? If you map it against the signs, changes happen at the fourth house, right? Changes happen at Cancer, it becomes summer. So all of those angles, if you are only listening to this and you have never seen a chart, like look at a chart and see like there's a plus sign out through the middle of all the houses, and it's basically the first three signs are winter, nope, they're spring, and then summer, and then fall, and then winter. So just kind of like mapping that out in your mind, you'll be able to map it to the last episode, which will give you a little bit more orientation. I also wanted to show you guys this because this is from the Astro Codes Oracle deck, which I, not sponsored, but I love this deck because it's literally like flashcards for astrology. And the IC, it looks like the representation, it looks like roots of a tree.
That's
Absolutely
beautiful.
like roots of a tree. So beautiful. And somebody I was talking to was like diving into the IC and going, wow, my deepest wounds are right there, because those are the ancestral wounds. Those are the things that I thought were true that I have to like unwind, and that's really hard for me. And I was like, wow, you hit on something so real and so true. Like, I thank you for that. So I find that to be also very true for a lot of people. The IC can sometimes show up in these spaces, like depending on what's touching it, what's near it. You might have like, whoa, this is a really big wound for me. Wow, this is like something that I've sort of been dealing with. This might even hurt more than like a Plutonian wound or a Chiron thing or a Lilith, depending on how things are playing out. So sometimes when we're going through like really hard times, it's a good place to look and be like, what's going on with my IC? Like, what is crossing my IC? What is happening here? Yeah. So let's talk about the fourth house.
I'm just going to
Yeah.
interject a little and that the IC also, because of that, because it's the darkest part of the chart, it is the most feminine. It's a lot where your femininity is hidden, right? Which makes such sense for Kaylee that her sun and her moon would be right on that IC, because that's her whole realm. I was just like thinking about that. But yes, so, and I
Pisces.
many of our wounds uh are related to the feminine. Like, so many of us have wounds related to the feminine in general. But yeah, it is the most feminine, which leads into the fourth house, which is also a very feminine house. So the fourth house is all about, so we have found our siblings, right? Like, we realized who we were, where our stuff was. We started interacting with some people. We get some communication going in that third house. And now in the fourth house, this is where our family and ancestry sits. So this house is associated with Cancer, which I love because I am a Cancer. And it's much more of a private house, and we talk about it having to do with, it can like the second house, depending on what question you're asking, it can actually have to do with physical houses sometimes, like your home and your family home, especially your ancestral home. But usually this is all about the roots. And we say it has to do with family, but it's much more tied into like parents specifically and ancestry, your actual ancestors. So the fourth house comes with a lot of emotion because it is those family ties and connections, and it's that those things that are like really deeply private to us and that we're connected through. It's also going to be our it's deeply tied to community, because it's our deep ancestral roots and our community and bringing things together, and that washing of the waves over us.
I think of that fourth house as the house of home and belonging. If you want to gain an understanding of how you feel a sense of belonging, that fourth house is a good place to go. Or if you want to understand why you don't feel like you belong, that is still a good place to go. And home, like, yeah, like Julie said, it can be actually a physical house. But that astrological house is connected to home, like the home that you grew up in, the environment that you grew up in, but it's also connected to the home that you've created as an adult. And so often we have echoes of our childhood in our adulthood, and part of becoming an adult is reconciling that, taking the good from that, releasing the bad, or maybe changing our minds about what we thought was good or bad, or maybe taking away the labels altogether. And so there can be a lot in that fourth house, a lot of um, deep psychological things. And to go back to something Julie said a little bit ago about the IC, um, and its connection to the fourth house. Oh man, I'm losing my train of thought. There was something really important about that, and now it's disappearing. Um, oh, what was it? We can move on, and if I remember, I will bring it back up. It was so important. Dang it.
I find that sometimes our brain blocks us from saying really important things because it's afraid. Um, so the fourth house, that's so funny that you said all that, because I'm like thinking, what is my house like now? And obviously having kids was a really big piece of me integrating my childhood. I think that your 20s are a big piece of integrating your childhood. That's why like adult children are really hard to be interacting with their parents unless they've done a lot of healing themselves. But yeah, so my house now, like my fourth house is cursed by Aries, and I have so much Aries in my house right now. My son is I thought he was an Aries moon, but apparently he's not. But my husband is Aries moon, Aries rising. My stepdaughter is Aries moon. Like there's so much Aries in my house. Not sun signs, but yeah, there's just a lot of that going on, and it's just been very interesting how it feels more in alignment than my previous life, right? Since I've integrated that. So some of this stuff, I also want it to be practical. And like, how would I even do that in my real life? Or what are some signs of that integration happening? that's what that looks like. It's like, oh, okay, things are lining up in a really new way, and I feel more at peace with my life as I'm doing work on myself. Like that's why we do astrology in the first place. So, but other than that, I have zero things in my fourth house, and I have a very strong family life. So many kids, so much caretaking, right? Um, yeah. Do you remember what you're gonna say?
Yes, I did. I totally
Awesome.
remembered.
My
Um,
ramblings
coming-
worked.
yes. Thank you. So coming back to the angles, um, for the most part, the way most people approach astrology nowadays, um, there's this big focus on the midheaven and the ascendant. Everybody talks about them. Half the time, they don't even mention the DC or the descendant or the IC. And it's so fascinating to me that that's the case because the ascendant and the midheaven are the most masculine of the angles. And so in my work, it's become increasingly apparent that no, 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 no. The IC and the DC, or the IC and the descendant, they are equally as important. They have stories to tell, they have work to be done. And I think part of why they've been kind of shunted into the background and forgotten about is that for so long we have had such an emphasis on masculine energy, even in astrology. And the more obvious, like, oh, the out there things, like not what you're receiving, but what are you giving? And so if you're really wanting to connect with your feminine energy, I highly, highly, highly recommend getting familiar with your imam coily and your descendant and really feeling into the energy there and learning about what's there for you, not just on the chart, but actually energetically and physically in your life.
So good. So good. Let's make it fun. What's the next house? The fifth house. What do we got going on there? What is the flavor of the fifth house?
Fifth house is fun, right? The fifth house is pleasure itself. The fifth house is often, it's so funny because I feel like I really don't ever pay attention to my fifth house, which is really hilarious. But the fifth house is actually all those things that are associated with joy and pleasure. It is also associated with children, right? So children, especially anciently, were seen as such a blessing. It's such a blessing you can have children. So the fifth house is a lot of your pleasure, your blessings, which means that the fifth house is also associated with sex because that is how you get children. And your
And
your
sex can be fun.
and sex can be fun. Exactly. Sex is fun. It's pleasure. And so this can be show up as a ton of things, like, right, this can also show up as your social gatherings and how you act in your social gatherings, what brings you joy, what's fun for you, what you're interested in. I said this the last time when we talked about Pisces, but I have Pisces in my fifth house. And so sometimes what's fun for me is the fantasy stuff, right? Like it's fun to watch Lord of the Rings and like fun to like do the fun nerdy fancy, but also artsy things, right? Doing art and making those pretty things. So you can tell a lot about what brings you pleasure by looking in your fifth house. And also you can tell a lot about your sexuality, how you interact with your sexuality, and maybe if you have some hangups in that fifth house. If we're talking about fertility and you want to ask questions about fertility, we're also going to the fifth house because it's about having babies and how that's going for you. So when I've had people come and say, like, what's my issue here? Like, why can't I get pregnant? Oftentimes we're going to look at the fifth house and what's going on there. It has this like it's ruled by Leo, right? So it's that very like fun, flamboyant, like, woo, look at me. Yeah. Kind of a deal, and how we have fun. What do you two think about the fifth house?
The fifth house is sometimes referred to as the playground. It tells you a lot, like Julie said, about how you have fun. It's about recreation. It's about relaxation, but it's also about creation. I think of it as the house of creation. And so that relates to children because they are a creation, but it also relates to other ways that you use creative energy. And that can be in an artistic sense, that can be in a like physical creating children sense, that can be in a sense of like, hey, I made this meal and I had fun doing it. Or I took these things and I put them together and look, now I have a birdhouse. Like creating anything. It can even be ideas. It's just this that very potent um, creative energy is a part of that fifth house. And because it's connected to children um, and that creation energy, there's also, you can kind of tap into your inner child through that fifth
Mm.
house and learn about how your inner child is doing in that fifth house.
So good. That's so good. I think I just had so many realizations just going through this. I have a loaded fifth house. I have so much in my fifth house, and it's all the worst stuff. It's Chiron, it's Lilith, and it's my sun sign, and it's all squaring my Jupiter and making a T square and doing all fun stuff. Anyways, that's like that is like the key to my chart is the fifth house and Gemini. That is like once I hit that, once I figure out that every time I've gone for the pleasure despite the fear, gone for the joy despite the fear, gone for the creativity despite the all the other crap, that's when everything lights up. So it just is like I always find that in everybody's chart there's just like a key. Like if they just focus on this one thing, they're going to impact everything. And that fifth house has always been my key. And I forget it because all the rest of the stuff in the chart is there to like, don't look at that one thing because you got all these other things to think about, right? Because that ego is focusing on everything but the actual piece that needs to be the focus. But yeah, I love the fifth house because it teaches me so many things. And by you guys just talking, I learned so many things that I knew, but like hearing them is so important. So yes, so good. Um, that's all I have to say about that. Let's go to, do you have anything else about the fifth house that would help people sort of use practical tools to work within their chart? What does it mean to have an empty fifth house? What does it mean to have a lot of stuff in that fifth house? Does that mean it's going to be actually a little bit more difficult? What does that all look like when it plays out in the fifth house?
Well, the first thing I was going to say, I have two big things about the fifth house. One that we touched on before, but if you're struggling with the sexuality in any way, right? Accepting pleasure, not being able to have a good orgasm, like let's just say it, if you have tension, if that's a tension point in your life, then you're really going to want to look at your fifth house to explore, well, how might I bring myself pleasure in those ways? Like what am I missing? Exactly what Kaylee said about her inner child, like maybe your inner child is missing something. And believe it or not, your inner child is connected to your sex life and like your ability to receive pleasure. So looking at those, that was the first thing I would say, because so many people do struggle in that area of their life. So just making sure you're looking at that. And then two, I was going to say is talents. Talents, which we don't always talk about this in conjunction with the fifth house, but it really truly is about your talents. What are you talented at? What are you good at? That's really located in the fifth house, especially if you feel like, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know where my talents lie. I'm having a hard time keying into them. Well, those things that bring you pleasure, they bring you pleasure probably because you're good at them. There's things that you're good at. There's talents that are hidden in there. And especially if you feel like I'm not creative, I have no creative abilities, well, look at what's in the fifth house, because maybe everyone is creative. I don't care what they say. Every human is creative and has creativity. But maybe if by looking at your fifth house, you can see how you are creative. What's your specific flavor of creativity? So for me, I've got Pisces in that fifth house, which means my flavor of creativity is more watery, right? It's my intuition, it's spirituality, it's all those deep things, right? That's why I always told people, like, even when I was going to law school, like, I just want to be a wise woman on the hill. Like, that's what I want to do is like, I just want to be, because it's that Piscean thing, but it's also artsy, right? So I like love that those creative things. So for an earth sign, maybe creativity to you is actually making and building something. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's spreadsheets, maybe it's, putting things in order, but you do have creativity and it is located in that fifth house for sure.
Those are such fantastic points that you just made. And I was thinking about my own chart and like, so people who know me, they might be surprised at which sign actually cusps my fifth house because I'm an artist. I've been a musician most of my life. Like you'd think, oh, she's got to have like something that you'd think of as artistic in that house. And yeah, granted, my sun and moon are in Pisces, so that helps. But I actually have Aries cusping my fifth house. And very literally, I create a lot with my body. Like I have almost 7 children. And then also, for me, when I am creating something else, if I key into my body, and make it an instinctive creation instead of a like totally planned out, like I have to have it this particular way, it goes so much better than if I try to control the process. And I really do think that connects to that Aries energy. And so the practical tip that came to my mind is that like create your creativity may not look like somebody else's creativity, but also what you find fun or relaxing or rejuvenating does not have to look like what somebody else finds fun or relaxing or rejuvenating. Some people are going to feel so relaxed after they climb a mountain. And some people are going to be like, I would rather shoot myself in the head. Like that sounds miserable. I would much rather go do this instead. Like there's no should. There's no have to when it comes to having fun, when it comes to relaxing. Key into yourself, key into your chart. Like, what actually does it take for you to experience fun and play? And if you hear the word play and you're like, ooh, maybe look into that. Because for a lot of adults, play has become this word that we just can't connect with.
I so agree. I also wanted to make this like connection, Kaylee, though, because you are a somatic healer. Like literally, you're a physical body healer. Like that's one of your greatest talents. And you were a massage therapist, and like so much of your talents and things that you do are connected to the physical body in so many ways. And you're a generator, which we've been talking about the past couple days, which is like that physical, sacral, creative force.
Mhm.
And it doesn't, if you have Aries in that fifth house, so usually if you're doing it by whole sign, if you are a Sagittarius rising, then you got Aries in the fifth house. Yes. No. Is that right? I think so. Yeah, because if you're a Scorpio rising, then Pisces is going to be in there, but Aries
Yeah.
cuts yours. Okay, that's right.
Which also, like, if we look at so Placidus, maybe we should have talked about this at the beginning.
We should have
Different
probably.
house. So let's maybe take a quick break to talk about this. There are
Mhm.
different house systems. There are different ways of breaking up the houses. And the two main ones that we talk about on this podcast and that we interact with are the Placidus house system and the whole sign house system. Because Julie is a Hellenistic astrologer, she tends to use the whole sign system. And isn't whole sign usually more effective for locational astrology as well?
Well, I think it is. But yes,
So,
I would
yes.
say timing and location, yeah, whole
Yeah.
sign usually more effective.
Um, and then the Placidus house system, house sizes can vary greatly in that system, and it tends to be a little bit more of a psychological system. And that's what a lot of astrologers, who you'd think of as like modern day astrologers, they have a tendency to gravitate towards the Placidus system. When I started studying the whole sign system, because I just knew the Placidus, well, and the equal house system, but we won't go there. Um, when I started studying whole sign, at first I was like, no, this is not what my chart is like. But then as I started really feeling into it, it's like, no, wait, this is also true. And so there's value in both house systems. So if you feel drawn to one or the other, that's totally fine. But also, there's a lot of really valuable information in both house systems. But so in my chart, in the Placidus system, yes, Aries cusps my fifth house. But in the whole sign system, it would be Pisces, which also makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and just so people know, when we're talking about whole sign, that just means one sign per house. So in Placidus, you could have multiple signs in a house. Most of the time, you have two. Sometimes you can have three if you have like some really crazy, like if you were born in Alaska or something. Sometimes you might have that. But because Placidus works based off of where you were born and the latitude and the longitude, and that's what designs how far apart the houses are from each other, how big they are, how small they are, and therefore how many signs can fit into them. So in Placidus, you can have two signs or three signs in a house, but in whole sign house, you cannot. You only have, it's one sign per house. So wherever your ascendant is, that would fill your whole. So like for me, I'm a Scorpio rising. So Scorpio fills my entire first house. But in Placidus, I have Scorpio in my first house and I have a lot of Sagittarius in my first house. So it just depends on what system you are using. And like Kaylee said, both have value. And I like to use, I think all three of us use both just to look at and double check things and see, what themes are running through both. And they can teach you, like whole sign can teach you things Placidus can't, and Placidus can teach you things that whole sign can't. And so that's why we have both of these systems. So don't get freaked out if you're like looking at these different charts and they look different. They have value and they're usually used for different kinds of things. So um when I said, right, if you're using whole sign, if you're a Sagittarius rising, then you're going to have Aries in that fifth house. And all of that to say that when you are like, we were talking about Kaylee having Aries in that fifth house and it being so connected to her body. And I was going to say my sister is also she's a Sagittarius rising. She's got Aries in that fifth house also. And she loves stuff about the body, but hers is more geared towards like nutrition research, right? Like learning about nutrition and like physical exercise. And like she just gobbles up learning about all those things. So just because Kaylee's house, like Aries, having Aries in that fifth house looks one way, and you have Aries in that fifth house and it might look a different way, just go back to our signs episode and like the elements and go through and kind of dissect that, because there can be more and more. Because just like Kaylee said, when I was talking about having Pisces in that fifth house, right, that can also be, I didn't touch on it, I talked about the spirituality piece, but it can also be music, because music is often associated with water signs. They're usually very musical. So there's lots of different ways that you can really enjoy that fifth house and that enjoyment looks for you. And then the last thing I want to say about that, I guess I should give an earth, and we should probably give an earth example and an air example. But the earth example might be something like maybe you like design, like designing house aesthetics, like and creating things. You could also like building things. You could be interested in engineering. You could be interested in spreadsheets, organizing. That would be, or just like practical parts of life, or just having fancy stuff, like fun
Mhm.
stuff,
Gardening.
gardening. That's a big one for earth. And then air, you might be looking at something like maybe you like to chat. Probably you like to talk, chat, socialize,
Mhm.
see different people, analyze things. So just think about those elements and what they might look and what they could be connected to lots of different talents and things that you enjoy. And then, sorry, the last thing I want to say about this, because we're talking about the house a lot. Very last thing I'm going to say, but I think it's so important, and we're almost done. We just have one more house we're going to go through, so we can splurge on the fifth house, which is and I've said this in a previous episode, but I think it is very true that oftentimes, wherever your rising is, when you find someone whose fifth house matches your rising, or vice versa, their rising matches your fifth house, they're they're just something that you like enjoy about that person. You tend to like enjoy being in that person's like physical space. And this can be true also of like their sun and their moon. If their sun and their moon match your fifth house, sometimes like that person just like brings you like enjoyment or like calming, or they have like gifts and talents that you love. So like a good example of this is me and Allie Juzette. She is a Cancer rising, and so her 5th house is Scorpio, and I'm a Scorpio rising. So, like, we just, like, get each other, and we just have so much fun together. We love to have fun, and we enjoy each other, and in those ways, you know? And so that kind of matches with us, and because she's a Cancer rising, it matches my sun sign, and so it's just, like, we have a good time, you know? So, you can often have a good time with people whose 5th house, you know, matches your sun, moon, or rising.
That's good information. I didn't even know that. That one I didn't know. I swear I'm going to come off as like having no idea about astrology, but the truth is I'm just not the greatest person to explain all of the ins and outs of like these little minutia, because the way I do astrology is I just look at what's there and I go, this is how you can make it better. This is how you can be more yourself. And all that like technical stuff comes to me in the moment. I don't like when I'm looking at the chart, right?
Mhm.
So that's how I do that. But let's talk about the sixth house and see what is going on in the sixth house. What are we talking about? What scenery are we talking about in the sixth house?
So sometimes the sixth house gets a bad rap. People are like, oh, the
Big
sixth
time.
house, blah. So, but there are so many wonderful things about the sixth house. Like, there's nothing truly bad in astrology. There's just different challenges, different opportunities, different ways of seeing things. And the sixth house is tied to things like your day to day life, your day to day routines. And with that comes health, with that comes work, with that comes kind of like service and duty. So, for those reasons, sometimes that sixth house just doesn't sound like much fun. But like how you interact with your sixth house and what's there in a lot of ways sets the foundation for every house that comes after. And so kind of making peace with that sixth house can be so, so important. Um, and some things that people don't think about as being connected to the sixth house sometimes are like pets. Pets are connected to the sixth house because you have to take care of them every day and their work. Um, and so, yeah, pets, if you have employees, you can learn about your relationship with your employees through that sixth house. Um, and you can learn about your physical constitution to a certain extent and how you can improve it or support it through that sixth house because it is so connected to health. And it's not health so much as like, oh, this is predetermined. It's health as in all these little actions that you've taken up or that you've taken over time add up. And this is what you've got because of it. And now what do you want to do about that? And what do you want to do moving forward with that?
Yeah, when we talk about medical astrology, right, the sixth house is more about fast acting illnesses or diseases, physical ones that we get, whereas they're more short term. It's short term physical issues, whereas the 12th house is going to be invisible illnesses like mental illness, more difficulties, and long term illnesses.
Like autoimmune, probably.
Yes, autoimmune can be there. I often see autoimmune in the first house as well
Well,
because
that
it's
makes a lot
huge.
of sense. Yeah.
Yep, your body attacking itself. So, that when we talk about health, we really are talking about our health routines, our healthy habits. How do we build those habits? And I did want to say, because I was going to mention the pets thing, right? It's small pets, right? It's small pets in the sixth house, and large animals live in the 12th house. So, like horses and bears, they live in the 12th house.
If
I
you
was like,
have a bear for a pet.
I guess I don't know, but it's not a. It's
You
definitely not a
got me, guys. I got a bear. He's ruled by my 12th house.
the
That's
circus bear, right? Like if you're one of I guess if you work on a movie set and you're the one who supplies animals to movies, right? You probably have a loaded 12th house maybe for the with
or
your bear.
something interesting there at least.
Yeah, for sure. But I also would say the the sixth house is also coworkers. So not just employees, but your coworkers. And part of the reason that the sixth house gets a bad rap is because the sixth house can be enemies as well, where your enemies are. The seventh house is open enemies, like enemies you see, and the 12th house is hidden enemies. But the sixth house can be just the house of enemies, like who's
The
not working.
day-to-day enemies.
Day-to-day, yeah. Your day-to-day enemies. This can also show you, right, speaking of that, like where you may have some vices with your day-to-day
Mhm.
life, what's hard for you, what routines are more difficult for you. What does your day-to-day life look like? So, for example, we used Allie before, but Allie has Uranus in her sixth house. So her day-to-day life just changes all the time. Like it can never be the same. It's always different because Uranus is always knocking stuff down. So if you have interesting stuff in your sixth house, then your day-to-day life might be more interesting. Like you might have more chaos or more smoothness or more things. And then I was going to say, the sixth house can also, some of the good things, like we talked about service, this can again go to talents and how can you be of service to other people? How do you serve them well? What's a good way, good things you can do day to day that are helpful? And then the sixth house, because it's tied to the number six, can be very helpful for as far as vision stuff, like how you can see things, how you can map things out, planning, how can you plan your life, and what are the little things you need to do that add up to your goals. So that's something we don't often talk about with the sixth house, but because it is that everyday life, it is also about like that planning aspect of how are you going to get to where you're going, like what daily actions are you going to take and plan for to get you to that long-term goal you aspire to.
Something else that just popped into my head about that sixth house is that so when people ask me about like work, what should I do for work? What should my career be? Or I don't love this that I'm doing. How can I change it? How can I make it better? And like we think of the 10th house as the house of like career and reputation in a lot of ways. And then the sixth house is tied into like what's the work you do on the daily? And if you want to have work that you do that's very fulfilling, what you're wanting to look for, it's more complex than this, but at bare bones, what you're looking for is something that marries the energy of your 10th house with your sixth house. Because if you're just connected to the sixth house, like you'll probably be fairly successful, but you might not feel super fulfilled. Actually, it kind of can go both ways. If you're only connecting to one of those houses and the energies of one of those houses, you might feel like you're doing great things, or you might be successful, but you won't feel fulfilled, or you'll feel fulfilled, but you won't actually be successful. And so, like, finding a way to marry those two houses, it can help a lot with that satisfaction, with being successful, with being able to define what success actually is for you. Um, so yeah, just a little tidbit there for career related, work related stuff.
I wanna just give an example of this because I don't think I don't think anybody ever realizes that the sum of the day-to-day tasks don't always like feel like they're adding up to something to a career, right? It's like say you're a doctor, that's your career, that's your 10th house, that's your midheaven, like, oh, I'm a doctor. But also part of being a doctor is like getting thrown up on and having weird stuff happen and having somebody go, does this smell funny? Right. And those are your day to day tasks. But like, that's not the glamorous side. That's the day to day stuff. Or like when I worked in retail, I was like, oh, I work at this fancy pants retail. I was 16, so whatever, it was fancy at the time. But really, my job was high end laundry. I was just folding clothes all the time, right? So thinking about things and like when you and that stops a lot of people from like creating the life of their dreams because then they get to the day-to-day task and they're like, what is this? I didn't know this was going to be part of my day-to-day life. So just kind of like bringing that into career and going, there's like day-to-day stuff that you're just like going to find to be weird that you have to do all the time. And like, what are you okay with, right? But everybody I've talked to is like, oh, I have say my north node's in my sixth house. Mine's not. It's in the third house. We talked about that. But say my north node's in the sixth house. And they're like, great. So my life purpose is dishes and laundry. Like, honey, no, not exactly. Not exactly. Because that is the house of dishes and laundry that nobody wants to talk about that. Um, but there's so much more to it. Like everything you said, nobody here said dishes and laundry. No one. So this, but that's one of those things. And the other thing that I learned was it's the house of unequal relationships. And so it's really easy if you have a loaded sixth house to get caught up in hierarchies and like who's bigger than me and who am I bigger than. And this is like it becomes a power struggle that you're the only one who's created this. So just pay attention to that if you have a lot going on in your sixth house. I personally do. So it's been a lifelong journey for me as well. Is this like better than, not better than, better than, not better than? And then other parts of my chart are like, we're all the same and, peace, love, and kumbaya. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Right. So it's a great balance, but do be aware, like if you feel like people are better than you, or like you need to feel better than other people in order to feel good enough, look at your sixth house.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Jan, because it also is this house of, looking at, because I was of service in so many ways. And that's why, right? Because it's this relationship of like the servant and the master, and who's the servant and who's the master. But if you do have your north node there and you do have a loaded sixth house, I do find that people who have those kinds of houses often have a caring type career, right? Like they're a caretaker of some kind, whether that or not that's like being a nurse or an LPN or somebody who just goes and does these serviceable things. But it can be, if you have your north node there, this is like your life is a life of service. And like thinking about who's connected, right? Virgo is connected to this sixth house, and that's also creationary in its own way, and like making creating new boundaries and making things like fit, right? All these like Virgo-esque things, right, is also this like beautiful maiden energy. And then of course the sixth house, that six is a double three. So we're looking again at the sixth house can have a spiritual effect a little bit because it's that double three, and it can have this lifelong service of serving the other and this grander purpose in like this very spiritual way. So don't feel like if you have your north node there, if you have a lot of planets there, like Jan said, you're just forever going to be the servant. Like, be a servant leader. You can be a servant leader, right? And you can really help people. And probably your greatest desire is to do something that really does help other people too.
I love that you said all of that, because you reminded me that like the sixth house is the house of the sacred in the mundane. How the mundane things like the dishes and the laundry can actually be sacred. And that's something that I have a tendency to forget because it is so hard in the day to day not to get bogged down in the laundry and the dishes and the prep of food and all the other various things that are a part of my day to day, at least. But there is sacredness and there is consecration, even there can be in those actions, those day to day actions.
So good. So good. Thank you guys so much. So that's our last house of the day. We're going to start back up next week with the seventh house, and we'll probably start with the descendant so we can really get an idea of what that descendant means. But I'm getting a sense that the people listening to this are a little bit like, whoa, I need to listen to that again. So we're going to leave them with that. What is one thing that you guys want to leave our audience with before we close out this episode about houses? Just like so much wisdom has been dropped that we run out of words. I love it.
Yeah, no, my brain's just like, man, what else do you say? Like the first thing that's popping into my head is like if there's a house that you find yourself struggling with, like that's okay. Like, you don't have to force yourself to love a house. Just recognizing where you are at with that house and with that house's energy, just acknowledging it without even attempting to change it can open up space for it to shift organically, for your relationship to that house to shift organically. Um, and there was something else I was going to say, but now I don't remember. So, Julie and Jayanne, did you have any final words?
Well, I was just going to say that every house has magic in it. You know, there's magic to every house. There is beauty to every house, and there's beauty, just like there's beauty to every part of our lives. And just like I think the sixth house was such a good example of that. It's going from, oh, this is your day to day, nothing, just having to work, 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 to no, this is sacredness in the mundane, right? This is sacredness, this is magic. And it is, really special. And I think, all of the houses have their own form of sacredness and how they relate to our lives. And there's something to be learned from all of them. And you can, like Kaylee said, you can change your relationship with them and you can find more and more nuggets. And I do want to say, like, this is a overview, right? Like what we're doing right now is an overview, and you can dive deep, deep, deep. Like we could do a whole episode on each one of these houses, and it's been done in other astrology podcasts. So there's just so much more, and just know, like, you can continue. If this is overwhelming, like, don't feel like you need to do this, but just know, if you're sitting there like, oh no, I have nothing in this house, or like, I don't like this house, or I don't know what this means, or whatever, just know that there's more you can take away, and there's always going to be more, but there is magic in every house.
I love it. Last thing I want to say is we just talked about the first half, which is the bottom half of the chart. And the bottom half of the chart is where we maintain and hold our shadow stuff. So if you felt like any of the houses we talked about were like, ew, gross, I don't have that house in my life, that's the one you need to focus on when it comes to shadow work. And if you have lots and lots of stuff in the bottom half of your chart, you just might have come into this life deciding to do more shadow work than maybe other people did, and that's okay. And maybe you only have one thing, but it's like Pluto or something, or Venus, or one specific thing. Like that's a really key point to be working on your shadow and integrating the shadow. So there's just so much that we can look at when it comes to a chart, even as we blur our eyes and say, what is the sense? What is the feeling of this chart? That's just one of those things. And that's something you can do today, is look at your chart and be like, what's in the bottom half of it? Jupiter and Venus. Okay, how can I integrate my Jupiter and Venus today? So those are my thoughts on that. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and chatting with me and sharing all this wisdom with everybody. Oh my gosh, this has just been such a deep, deep episode, and I'm just loving it. All right, well, we'll see you guys next week, and have a good one. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening, and share with someone you know. See you next week.